Victoria 3 is the latest grand strategy game from Paradox Interactive. In this beginner's guide, we're going to go through all of the basic concepts you'll need in order to play the game, and we're also going to try to do it in under 20 minutes. Let's start with the absolute basics. Let's click New Game and then deal with the menu that comes up. First off, I would recommend you start by clicking Learn the Game here. Once you've done that, you can choose one of the 4 game modes to play in: Economic Dominance, Hegemony, and Egalitarian Society. Each give you some extra journal entries or quests in order to go down the route to forging this as an overarching goal for your campaign. Selecting Sandbox is identical to picking any of the others in terms of the game you'll actually be playing. Once there, pick a country you're going to play, and let's dive in and start the game. Before you get too overwhelmed with the variety of different UI elements displayed on our screen, please stop. Let's try to dive into things one piece at a time and get through what is going on in this very complicated economic simulator. By going to the menu on our left-hand side, I'm going to open up the market, which I would argue is the most important part of this game. From here we can see the different goods being bought and sold across our market, not just in our nation. You see, if you're involved in customs unions, or you happen to have some sort of other relationship like a puppet, a dominion, or a protectorate, those other nation states will all be embroiled in the same market. If I go to the Members tab, I can see all of the different nations currently in my market. Jumping back to the main market screen, we've got 4 different categories of goods. Staple goods are the things that people in your market need just in order to survive. They're things like food for eating, wood for fuel, and clothes for staying warm and decent. Next is industrial goods. Generally, this is a lot of raw materials, and you'll tend to use these goods in order to create a more complicated good. Speaking of more complicated goods, we have luxury goods. These are goods which people in your market don't need in order to survive, but they would very much like to have them. Things like luxury furniture, alcohol, and even meat. The final category is military goods. You'll need these in order to equip and maintain an army and a navy. The way that the economy is modeled in Victoria 3 is with supply and demand. Demand is simulated by buy orders. Buy orders come from industries requiring a good for manufacture, from pop consumption, or a foreign export route. Sell orders is the supply side that comes from industries in your market and foreign import routes. Based on the relative balance or imbalance between supply and demand, that will affect the market price of a good in your empire. The higher the price of a good, the better it is for anyone selling it, but that also makes it much worse and more expensive for anyone trying to buy it, be they a person or an industry. It is through manipulation of these market prices that we can affect change not just in our nation, but in other nations around the world. So how do we control these numbers? Well, a very quick and dirty way to do that is to set up new trade routes. For example, if we wanted to lower the price of these groceries and make life a little bit easier for all of the pops are representative of people in this game, then we can click on this good and set up a new import route. Import routes generally cost you some bureaucracy, and if they're overseas, they cost some convoys as well. Convoys are generated by ports in your nation or market, and bureaucracy is generated by bureaucrats working for your government. By setting up a new trade route here of groceries, I've lowered the price by about 8%. I can also do the same for a good which is in dramatic oversupply. I can create a new export route, or many export routes, and begin selling them abroad. These additional trade routes will increase the number of buy orders and bring the price up, helping out anyone attempting to sell that good. Generally, there is no right answer for where you would like the goods price to be fixed, but as a rule of thumb, what you'll want to do is exploit high prices in other nations to export your surplus to, and low prices in other nations to import their surplus. Whilst in my own nation, I generally attempt to balance supply and demand, but it really does depend on what you're trying to achieve. The one thing you need to look out for is a goods input shortage. If a good is required by an industry, like explosives here, which are required by a munition plant, and we have less than half of the sell orders compared to the buy orders, we will get an input shortage that will reduce the total amount of goods being made that require this base good. This won't be instant, it will take some time for this to percolate through, but it can have a knock-on effect if the output good is required by another industry to make another good. That is why it can be very devastating to set yourself up as the sole exporter to a particular nation of one basic good like wood or iron, and then take that away from them in order to make more advanced industries crumble. But where are these goods being made? Well, your nation is split up into a variety of states. If we select a state, for example, Posen here, we get a whole wealth of information. First off, and very importantly, how much access does this state have to the overall market of your nation? You want to make sure this is always at 100%. If it is not at 100%, there can be two main reasons for this. Either your infrastructure capacity is below your usage, or this state is overseas and the trade route is being blockaded. Jumping over to the Buildings tab, we can see all of the different industries or buildings in each of our states. Selecting a building lets us get even more information. This is the food industry, producing all of the groceries available in our nation, and quite a lot of the alcohol as well. From here we can see what size it is, what the productivity is, what the average wage is, importantly what the employment levels are, and how much in the way of cash reserves are stored with this building. And now you can see where the market comes in. So we're turning grain, sugar, and using human labor in order to get some liquor and groceries. These are then being sold, and the difference between our expenses and our output is our net profit. In this case, £1,290. All of that is being paid directly in ownership shares as dividends to the owners of this building. Depending on the ownership production method you have, that will dictate who gets this surplus. If we wanted to produce more goods, for example, more groceries, there are two ways we can do this at our building. We can expand the food industries, or we can look at changing one of the production methods. Higher levels of production methods generally require more technologies, or in the case of ownership, different laws. We can only change the production methods for all buildings in one state from this screen, or if we go to the building screen, we can change the production methods for all buildings, or if we tab down, each individual building in a state. For example, East Prussia, North Rhine, or Silesia. This means to increase the production of a good, we can either build horizontally, build more factories, or change things vertically, make the production method go up, which therefore leads to an increase in output. Be careful of this number here, it isn't always correct. As this is a very complicated game and the markets are quite dynamic, this is something of a stupid tool that is only going to give you the barest impact. You see, if I move up to a dye workshop here, because all of my dye is coming from trade routes, that should actually react when we increase the amount of buy orders in the game. Now as buy orders have gone up, our trade routes are improving and we're now importing more than we were before, meaning we're actually making more money than we previously thought. The production methods generally tend to be split into a base method, which as you go up increases the labor requirements and goods requirements, but produces more of whatever good this industry manufactures. There might be some form of luxury production, which will reduce the base good, increase the total employment required by the building, possibly change the goods consumption, but then produce some luxury goods. An automation method, which generally requires some more resources but massively reduces the employment costs and requirements of the building. This is very important if we are running out of population. And the ownership method. Changing up this basically changes who benefits from an industry's profitability. And if you're enjoying this video, please guide that like button to a great tomorrow. So I've started constructing a building, and that's being handled by my construction sector. Each building has a total amount of construction points it needs before it will be finished. You get a base of 5 construction points, and then each construction sector will add additional points. Like all buildings, construction centers have different production methods, and the more advanced production methods increase the construction output whilst requiring different and usually more expensive goods. When you want to construct a new building, there are a number of ways of doing that. Either go to the state screen and click the plus icon here to increase the number under construction, or you can do the same thing from the building menu, or we can use one of the lenses on the bottom. My preferred method is to use one of these lenses, as this can give us some extra information. It can be a little confusing as various buildings are hidden within different menu categories. The buildings tab is split between urban, rural, development, and construction, whereas rural tends to be split between agriculture and resource, and urban is split between industry. The political lens, buildings, and development buildings are split between the military lens and the trade lens. When you're building a new building, the main things to look out for are whether or not there are enough people in that state in order to occupy all of the new jobs that building will need. If there are no available people, building additional buildings will either leave that building empty and lacking of employees, or cause other buildings to suffer from employment shortages as workers move from lower to higher paid jobs. Also, do keep in mind current building level, because for each building level already in a state, you will increase the throughput of all of those buildings by 1%. This means that a level 5 factory in one state is 5% more productive than 5 level 1 factories split between different states. Don't worry too much about this profit impact tooltip. It is another stupid tooltip that cannot react to the overall complexities of your market. It could very well tell you that you will have a negative profit impact, but in fact that won't be the case. Also, keep in mind that these profit impacts don't directly give you any extra money. This is just the profit impact to whoever owns the building, which is defined by that ownership method. Why is it important who owns the building? Well, that takes us into the population in our game, represented here by pops. Pops are highly granular and can be represented all the way down to just a single person. From our workforce here, we can take a look at the shopkeepers that own these food industries. They are currently doing prosperous level 28 on the standard of living. Standard of living affects the pop growth rate, how many pops will be born and increase in this strata or this class, as well as their loyalty or radical nature. Increasing or decreasing a pop's standard of living will make them more loyal or more radical. When we dive into one of these pops' net income, we can start to see how the economy of our nation functions. Pops earn money through wages, possibly some dependent wages, and if they are of the ownership class, some dividends. If your nation goes into debt as well, they might also be making money from interest payments from your state. Then they have their expenses. These come in the form of taxes going towards your nation's coffers, and taxes can take a variety of different forms. Consumption taxes is a tax on goods that are being used by these pops. Per capita taxes is a poll tax, basically levied flat based on their numerousness. And income taxes are taxes collected on their wages. Following all of their tax payments, they'll then spend money on the things they need. This is from luxury items all the way down to basic food and heating. If a pop is making money, that means they'll be progressing to a higher level of wealth, thus spending more of their money on more and more expensive needs. On the other hand, if they are losing money every month, their standard of living will be decreasing. Scrolling down, we can see which interest groups these pops support, as most pops have political strength that they lend towards an interest group that represents them in this country. There are 3 specific stratas in your nation. Each strata is filled with pops of a certain profession. The lower strata is filled with things like peasants, servicemen, and laborers. The middle strata is filled with things like engineers, shopkeepers, bureaucrats, and academics. And the upper strata is your aristocrats and your capitalists. Higher stratas generally have higher living conditions and expect higher standards of living. Each of our pops are from a certain culture, have a certain religion, and based on the laws in our nation, live slightly different lives. From the culture screen, we can also look at nation formation, where once we have nationalism, we can attempt to launch a unification play, or if we already have enough states, simply form that nation anyway. Speaking of the political system, let's take a look at it. From the politics screen, we can get a general overview of what is going on in our nation. From the government screen, we can decide which interest groups are in power and which are in opposition. By reforming government, we can move these interest groups around and change things up. As you move things around, you might get more of these radicals or lose loyalists. You'll also be changing legitimacy. Legitimacy is an important value as it affects how long it takes to pass a law in your nation. And if your legitimacy falls down to 0, you basically can't change any laws. Laws are split into 3 categories: power structure, economy, and human rights. Each law will have some impact on your nation, whether that's giving you extra authority, increasing the political strength of a certain interest group, or simply telling you how many battalions you can mobilize. Laws will also unlock institutions. Institutions, just like trade routes, require bureaucracy. It takes time to move up or down an institution's investment level, and as you move up, you get access to greater benefits from that institution. So how do we actually go about changing one of these laws? Well, in each of these categories, there will be a whole bunch of different laws that are available. However, at the moment, I actually can't enact any of these changes. In order to have a chance at enacting a change, there must be suitable endorsement from interest groups in our nation. And those endorsing interest groups must be in the government. For example, if I want to change over from autocracy here and take absolute power away from myself, possibly a bad idea, and move to something like landed voting, I will want to get as many of these groups into government as I can. At present, I will have just a 12% chance every 220 days. This is based on the minimum of 180 and then that legitimacy factor, Whether or not an interest group supports a law is dependent on their ideologies. Each interest group will generally have 3 basic ideologies, as well as one based on their leader. This means that as leaders of the interest groups change, the interest group's focus can move over time. So if we want to have the maximum chance of passing landed voting, we'll want to put in the industrialists, who are neutral towards landed voting, and the intelligentsia, who are also neutral towards landed voting. You see, even though they are neutral, they oppose oligarchy and autocracy and are therefore in favor of moving away from those laws. Gradual change is something that these interest groups are happy with as long as the pace continues. Diplomacy is key to enforcing your will on the world. In order to do anything in an area of the world, you will need to declare an interest in that region. Depending on your power level, you'll get a higher maximum declared interest level. After declaring an interest, it does take some time for that interest to become active, but once it is, you can do one of the many diplomatic plays in that region. When you decide to begin a diplomatic play, then things will really get going. Diplomatic plays have 3 phases. In the first phase, opening moves, you can't really do much. It is in the second phase, diplomatic maneuvers, that things really start to get going. You will have a primary war goal that was selected at the start of this diplomatic play. You can add further war goals to this, or attempt to sway other countries to your cause by promising them specific war goals or obligations. Depending on the war goals you'll take, you can also get something called infamy. The more infamy you have, the more the other nations in the world will dislike you. You can back down at any time. If you do, the primary war goal of your enemy will be enforced. The same is true of them though, and if they back down, this diplomatic play will be over and your primary war goal will be achieved, but none of the additional ones. If neither side backs down, you will end up in a war. Make sure to go to your military and mobilize any generals you might need before that. It takes time for armies to mobilize before they are at full effectiveness, so make sure to do this early. Once the war has started, you can attempt to make peace by proposing various combined peace deals. If any nation's war support reaches -100, they are also automatically forced to capitulate. That can be one of the fastest routes to peace. Notice you can't currently add any additional war goals after a conflict has started, and whilst engaged in a diplomatic play or war, you can't initiate any further diplomatic plays. Whilst at a front, you can order your generals to do one of 2 things: advance, meaning they will attempt to attack, or defend, meaning they will simply never attempt to attack. Other than this, battles are entirely outside of your control. It is down to the generals and the troops fighting them to work out who's going to win. Generally speaking though, having higher quality soldiers than your opponent is the surest way to victory, even if they outnumber you. You'll also want to research technology to advance your nation. There are 3 technology trees. Production generally increases the production methods of your buildings, military generally advances the production methods of your armies and navies, and society generally has an impact on which laws you can enact. There are 2 ways you will get research. The first is by choosing something to work towards. In this case, I've taken fieldworks. Based on my weekly innovation from a base of 50 and the universities in my nation, this progress will go towards fieldworks. And then there is technology spread. This can give you points in technologies you're currently not actively researching from other nations that already have them. This value is based on your overall literacy, so having a more literate population in your nation will increase your technology spread and therefore the total amount of technology you're going to be getting. The journal tab is full of lots of small little quests we can do. When completed, they usually trigger an event that gives you some sort of bonus. Don't forget to check on the Decisions tab. From here you'll be able to go on expeditions, build the Panama Canal, or survey the land required to build a skyscraper. The bar at the top of the screen is a good indicator for the health of your nation. Bureaucracy is generated by the government administration buildings in your states, and is spent on institutions, having incorporated states in your nation, trade routes, and generals and admirals. Authority is generated by your laws and improved by your technology, and you can spend it on raising consumption taxes on goods, or going to political parties and suppressing or bolstering them. Influence is generated from your power rank, any rivalries, and improved by technology. We use influence to do all of the diplomatic actions in the game. Money is generally raised in taxes, minting, tariffs, and diplomatic pacts. Then you spend it on government buildings and wages, as well as military buildings and wages, and additionally, construction goods. We do have something called an investment pool, and depending on your laws, some money from your existing buildings will flow towards this investment pool and can be put to use for building new buildings. If your investment pool is high enough, it can entirely pay all of the construction costs for construction in your empire. Also, don't be afraid of having a negative budget. Until you run out of your gold reserves, you won't even begin to go into debt. I find that having a high weekly balance means I need to either lower taxation levels, which improves the living standards of all your pops, or build more construction sectors and grow my economy faster that way. Underneath these, we have GDP, which is the size of your economy, the literacy rate, which has an impact on technology spread, the standard of living, the population of your state, the number of radicals, and the number of loyalists in your nation. We can also see what our rank is. We are currently a great power. You can go from a great power all the way down to an insignificant power. When you engage in diplomacy based on the relative difference of your power levels, you can do different actions. If you've enjoyed this Victoria 3 video and you'd like to see me form Germany in the first 6 years of the game, click the video on screen now.